Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that I haven't really addressed in the 700 or so videos that I have out on YouTube. It's a request that I get from the viewers all the time, and that's to do a breakdown of the hooks that I choose to use with all of the different plastic style baits. This is something that can often be debated. There's a lot of different opinions out there, but I truly believe that choosing the right hook will lead to a better day on the water, and choosing the wrong hook can cost you some fish. It may either prevent you from getting good hookups, and it could also prevent you from landing the fish that you do hook up. So choosing the right hook is one of the most important things that we do in our sport. So I'm going to break down the hooks that I use, the baits that I use them with, and kind of what my thought process is. Like I said, this is something I've gotten a lot of requests for, so I think it's got some good, valuable information in it. And I want to remind you guys before I get into this that I do have a members only channel. On that channel, I do a bunch of extra videos as well as a monthly live stream. So if that's something that interests you, check that out. Or maybe you want to reach out to me directly and we can have a one-on-one virtual session. Those I've got up through fishthemoment.com. You can look at the video description and find the link for that. It's a great way to have direct contact with me so that we can talk through the questions that you have. It's all done basically through a Zoom call, so we have face-to-face conversation. So check that out as well. The link is in the video description. And if you got questions about hooks, that would be a good way to do it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break my hooks down into worms versus like creature style baits and flipping baits. So the first thing I want to just point out is there are two primary style of offset worm hooks. So I'm going to hold these up side by side. One is in a Shaughnessy style bend, which is here you can see that you've got a wider or a more cut off bend, more of an angle bend. And then below it here, I've got what's called an offset round bend worm hook. Now there's a lot of debate out there about which hook is better. A lot of the pros out there will tell you that the O'Shaughnessy style locks the fish in better and you catch more fish because of it. My rule of thumb is I prefer the O'Shaughnessy style worm hook, the offset O'Shaughnessy style worm hook, or what would basically be considered just a normal worm hook. The reason for that is you shorten the gap up between the hook and the hook point, the shaft of the hook and the hook point. So when you hook a fish, this pins the hook in the fish's mouth better, meaning there's less open room here for that hook to wiggle around as the fish jumps or goes to shake the hook. So in my opinion, you lose less fish with a worm hook that's got more of the O'Shaughnessy style bend. So I would use this with, say, a Berkeley power worm, and when I rig this up, I'm just going to throw it on quick for you. You slide it up, you've got that bend. This is a good hook where you can pinch it, you get a good weedlessness to it. It works great, and you've got a lot of gap here still, so that when that fish bites it and that worm condenses, you've got a lot of gap to get to hook the fish. Now, having said that, if I'm going with a bulkier worm, so compare this 7.5-inch power worm to, say, this Magnum speed worm, you can see this is at least twice as thick. Now, in that case, I'm not going to go with the standard O'Shaughnessy style bend, the smaller closed gap, because when I rig this, and again, I'm just throwing it on here. I don't want to have the comments about the tail's in the wrong position or blah, blah, blah. So when I rig this, you can see there is so much less gap here. So when a fish bites it, you don't have the same amount of room to get that hook penetration down because the worm is very, very thick. So in that case, I will choose to go to the round bend style of offset worm hook because I get additional gap, which gives me better hook sets. So in this case, you can see if that fish slides that bait down, I have probably a 1/4 inch, if not more, because now the worm can slide down further down into that gap, which is much better than the O'Shaughnessy style. So for me, the difference between the two primary hooks that I think you should use when talking about your straight worms comes down to the thickness of the worm. So if you've got a thinner, normal size worm, go with the O'Shaughnessy style bend. It has that more of a sickle shape to it. And if you've got a thick worm like your Magnum speed worm, go with a full round bend. You can see there's a significant amount of gap difference on those two. And that little bit of gap will help you get better hookups on a bigger, thicker worm. Now, having said that, if I'm going to go with a thinner worm, like this robo worm, and we'll compare that to the 7.5-inch power worm, you can see the power worm is slightly thicker. It's also a tougher material. And in that case, I'm going to not even go with the offset. An offset hook is this little offset right here. And I'm going to go with a straight shank like the rebarb, RoboWorm rebarb hook. So in this case, it's got a little bit of a barb that will hold the worm up. And the reason for that is it's such a small finessey style worm that I don't need the offset. I don't need that offset to allow me to hook this worm in a good position and be able to get the right hook sets. So in this case, you can see I've got it hooked through the worm. There's still enough gap on this little one, and the bait is so soft that it just like melts over the hook. And because it melts over the hook, you get perfectly good hookups. And this is, this is the difference for me. It really just comes down to worm thickness. You need enough gap to be able to get that, to be able to create enough space to get that hook point into the fish's mouth without any obstruction from the plastic preventing the hook going in. So that's my thought process when it comes down to my plastic worm style selection. Now, if we're talking about creature baits, which is a bulkier plastic, that's when I'll go with the offset, the the extra wide gap style, the offset EWG. So extra wide gap means you have more space between the hook point and the bend and the actual shaft of the hook. So it's the same hook, but they put curve in the back of the hook. See if I can hold these. They put curve in the back of the hook to create even more gap. And the reason they do that is because your creature style baits, your craws and your beavers and all that type of bait is a bigger, thicker, bulkier bait than, again, your worms, right? It's wider, it's way thicker, it's wider than even a big Magnum speed worm, and it's every bit as thick. So you need more space so that when that fish bites it, that bait slides down into that lower portion created by the extra wide gap in the hook, which gives you that extra space. Now, if you're talking about fishing an EWG style hook, an extra wide gap on a worm, it's not necessary. You don't need it. You can get away with it and it still works, but there's no real reason to do it. And in my opinion, all you're doing at that point is making this bait a much bulkier bait. It doesn't look as natural. This sticks out a little bit further, and you don't get the same presentation out of it. So I wouldn't use an EWG style hook on a worm. These are meant to throw with your bigger, bulkier baits so that that bait can fall down into this hook recession right there. That's the important thing to know. The other hook style that a lot of people choose to use with their creature style baits is a straight shank, like flippin' style hook. In this case, this is, similar to the little rebarb hook, only on a much bigger scale. This is personal preference. Now, I have done videos on this. I choose not to use a straight shank hook when flipping. I think there's a specific art on the hook set, meaning, you still can rig this nice. It works well. I will say that when you hook them, when you actually hook a fish with that straight shank, it's very difficult to lose them. I feel like your hookup ratio or your landing ratio is excellent. The problem that I have is that If you're if you're using this with a Snell style knot with a big weight, so you're punching a 1 ounce weight, if you set the hook too hard, what you end up doing is using that big weight to blow the fish's mouth open. And because you've got this hook snelled, which is what a lot of people would do, it actually pulls the hook point down. And therefore, if you blast it out of that fish's mouth, you miss a lot of hook sets. I like to set the hook hard when I'm flipping. It's one of those things that it's hard to control. You feel a bite, you're in, say, a hyacinth mat or a milfoil mat, and you want to get that fish out. So I tend to set the hook hard, and I miss a lot of fish. Now, if you're somebody that can control your hook set really, really well, then I would say you're fine snelling a straight shank hook. Now, me personally, I would rather just go to a extra heavy EWG, a heavy cover model. I think I get better hookups and my landing percentage is just about as good. So for me, that hook works better. Now, if I do end up throwing a straight shank flipping style hook, I don't use a snell knot, I use a double polymer knot. So that helps limit that hook being pulled in, but I still would prefer to go with an EWG. It's one of those things that for me, it works better. That's a very debated topic, but it's what I choose to do. And that's what I want to point out here, guys. I want you to stick with what works for you the best, but I do think there are specific hooks that you want to use to match up with specific baits because it will enhance the performance of the bait and it will increase your hookup percentages, which help with your landing percentage. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, share it on your social media, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We'll have another video coming out tomorrow.